webinar titled Reimagining Differentiation, Supporting Virtual Exchanges. Well, my name is Abraham Cervero, or Abraham Cervero, as I would say in my language, and I'm the chosen one to be your host tonight. I'm a lecturer at Florida Universitaria, where I am right now, in Valencia, Spain, which is an affiliated campus with the University of Valencia. I've done some research on virtual exchange or COIL or telecollaboration, name it as you like it. And I guess that's why I'm here today as the MC of this webinar. It is, by the way, a pleasure and a privilege for me. Before I introduce our presenter tonight, let me anticipate our next eLive event, in which Kurt Kohn, Emeritus Professor at the University of Tübingen, will give the next eLive Experts webinar on the 22nd of March at the same very time, 7 p.m. Central European Time. The title is Emancipating Foreign Language Learners Through Virtual Intercultural Exchange, the Pedagogical Potential of Lingua Franca Immersion. A link to register will be available soon. Right, well, let's get on with it, okay? Just let me introduce our presenter tonight. She's Tanya Riordan. She is a PGC course director at the University of Portsmouth in the United Kingdom. This course is the equivalent of the master's that in Spain allows graduate students to become secondary and vocational training teachers, sort of. The Modern Foreign Languages course that she runs has been part of an outstanding program of teaching and learning as assessed by the Ofsted in 2010. And she is also a very experienced English as a foreign language teacher. She has also taught French and German in different schools. She holds a master's degree in education, and her research interests include foreign language teaching and learning in the primary and secondary stages, and policies of implementation, effective language teaching. Her latest research outputs have covered those areas. And in fact, one of her most recent articles is closely related to the topic of our concern in this seminar. So, Tanya will be presenting for about 25 minutes. We'll discuss some of the issues raised, and then the audience will have time to ask questions. And if I'm mistaken, please, eLive managers, right my wrong. So, now, can I just ask you to mute yourselves and turn your cameras off for the presentation, please? Over to you, Tanya.
Thank you very much, Abraham. And it really is an honor to be here talking to you all this evening and sharing some of the research that I've been carrying out. So this presentation is based on research that I've been conducting over the last 3 years, considering how important knowledge of learning theories is for teachers, and most specifically in terms of differentiation. And from this research, I've developed my own definition of differentiation, hopefully to contribute to the debate, and I'll share that with you later. I selected 3 key theoretical concepts, which I consider to have been crucial in helping teachers realise how theory can help support them in the classroom with understanding and applying differentiation. This presentation will also provide some practical ideas and tasks gathered from what I've read and observed to be working well in the classroom. Following a review of the literature, I carried out an inquiry involving 3 cohorts, 3-year groups of student teachers, a focus group of mentors, in other words, experienced teachers who support student teachers in their schools, and my own reflections as a teacher educator. In my readings, I found many different definitions to define or to explain differentiation, but there were some commonalities between them. One definition I particularly liked was cited by Professor Li Wei based on Eastern philosophies. He says, "Vary the way you teach according to the person you teach. Teach in a way that best suits the ability of the learner. Teach in a way that makes the best use of the circumstance or the context or the material available." This definition, it seems to me, places the responsibility fairly and squarely on the shoulders of teachers and their professionalism. You make the decisions about how to teach based on the learners in front of you and their needs. And hence, government directives about how to teach are not always appropriate. This is the new definition which I wrote as a result of the research. I've tried to make it student-focused so that students have some involvement in their learning, and to give it a basis in learning theory. And I'm hoping that it'll contribute to the debate around the topic of differentiation. I'll let you read it. The term differentiation has been dropped from certain teaching documents in the UK in favour of adaptive teaching. See here some quotes from government documents. However, since I haven't found a clear definition of either differentiation or adaptive teaching in these documents, I have to conclude that the two terms can be regarded as one and the same. I read about 39 articles to understand when each term was being used, and I've come to the opinion that when an article was written by an English person, the term differentiation was used, and when written by an American, the term adaptive teaching was used. Many of the ideas expressed are similar, such as students learn at different rates. They need different types of support. They have different levels of prior attainment. They can be flexibly grouped. However, there is a shift in focus which I've identified, most notably providing targeted support for learners who require it, enabling the teachers to be more efficient in their decision making. Spending more time interacting with the learners, giving more wait time, and making sure all students receive enough praise and encouragement. There's a greater emphasis on adapting the learning in the moment. In other words, as you notice what your students are doing. Let me give you an example. I was at my granddaughter's parents' evening not long ago, and we had two contrasting experiences. She is incredibly quiet, and one teacher told us that since she never puts her hand up, she doesn't really know if she understands or not. Another teacher said, I know when she's thinking because her eyes light up, and that's when I pounce and I ask her to share her ideas. I'll let you decide who's adapting the learning in that situation. In order to understand how teachers use theory, I think there are lots of different ways in which an understanding of learning theory can support our work as teachers, both in and out of the classroom. Let's have a look at these here. I think theories are useful for informing our planning and teaching to construct the most effective learning opportunities for our students. It helps to explain how students gain knowledge and understanding. It helps to guide our responses to individual learners. It supports us in the diagnosis of in-class problems. It also helps us to understand and evaluate our practice. And especially in my job, it supports me with classroom observations of learning and teaching. I've chosen these three theories or theoretical concepts because they're the ones that have emerged from the literature as significant to the research. Over a year, I gathered data regarding the links that could be made or the insights gained between learning theory and the practice of differentiation. The ZPD, or the zone of proximal development, is an important theoretical concept for understanding how students can be helped to move forwards in their learning. In this diagram, you can see a green circle. This represents the current level of development, what the student can do now. The orange area, or the zone, is where we want the learner to be. This is where we want them to be operating with additional help. In other words, support from the teacher. Some writers refer implicitly to this concept and refer to students working just above their individual comfort level, or working at their point of need, or having a +1 point. For differentiation, the implications of using Vygotsky's theory in the classroom are that our students need to have opportunities to cooperate and interact with one another. So teachers need to be creating tasks and activities which allow the students to work together and discuss their learning through pair work, through group work. Vygotsky was convinced that children learn best when supported by a more knowledgeable other. And pitching the lesson at the correct level is important too. When I work with student teachers, they often have difficulty doing this. They'll either pitch the lesson beyond the student ZPD, or they ask a question and everyone puts their hand up because it's too easy. What was implied by Vygotsky in terms of support was formalized by Brunner and Wood, and the term scaffolding was used. They identified several functions of the scaffolding process, for example, encouraging the student by giving them hints on getting started, or breaking down the tasks and giving them prompts such as cue cards, marking critical features, maybe by sharing checklists or knowledge organizers with them, modeling an example answer, and also giving them encouragement through praise and rewards. So what might that support look like? It could be cue cards or support sheets or vocabulary lists, maybe dictionaries or wall charts. If it's support from the teacher, should that be in verbal form or written form? How often will they receive instruction? Will it be the same for everyone? And should those instructions be verbal or written? Wood later developed the theory of scaffolding to include contingent tutoring. This refers specifically to the support offered on a one-to-one basis by the teacher when they see that a student is struggling. This contingency leads to effective differentiation when the teacher responds directly to the needs of the student. And that therefore is different to scaffolding, because that can be planned in advance. I actually think that this form of differentiation is particularly difficult for the novice teacher to be able to do. With experience, you know when to intervene, and you can notice when a student needs help and also what form that help might take. Teachers can work on these elements by being proactive in advance of the lesson, such as identifying core success criteria on their lesson plans, and then creating branching activities which will enable all students to access these through support and challenge, such as breaking the learning down into manageable chunks. It's key that we challenge all students and not just our more able. Teachers should try to avoid labelling learners as either low, middle or high ability, and to aim to challenge all learners irrespective of their individual needs of attainment. Similarly, all learners will at some point need to recap their learning, in which case we need to get to know our learners well, their backgrounds, their interests, their knowledge and their strengths. What do they already know? And can we push them to a +1? We also need to consider how we check that learning and how we provide regular feedback. There are different ways in which teachers can differentiate. This can be encouraged through text, task, outcome, but all types on this list, apart from the last one, can be helpful in thinking about how to organise differentiation in the classroom. These were observed in lessons during the period of investigation. However, interest and choice have been highlighted in bold because they were not found in my research. In other words, my student teachers weren't using these to adapt the learning, nor were they reflecting on them in their evaluations. But we know that following up individual learner interests is motivating and enjoyable for the students. I remember when I was teaching, I asked my students to do a presentation in French. And one particular child chose to focus on his involvement in a steel pan band. He went from being a bored, disinterested student to a highly motivated one. So these can be very powerful means of allowing individuals to work and learn appropriately. I'm now going to move on to examples of how teachers develop this in the classroom. Pair work enables the teacher to move around the room, listening to students discuss with each other, monitoring their grasp of the issues, identifying possible areas of weakness that need further clarification. Teachers can then provide individual feedback on the go. Pair work gives individual learners the possibility of exploring new ideas or consolidating their learning. It builds their confidence without the spotlight of being in front of the whole class, and it frees the teacher from directly teaching the whole class. See, for example, a pairs activity in French, where the students ask and answer a question, but some may have a little more prompting than others. The students are achieving the same goal of asking where the other lives and saying where they live. But in the first cue card, you'll see that there's some help with the first letter of every word given, whereas in the second cue card, the student doesn't have the same support. Or here is the preparation vocabulary sheet with sentence builders for use with either trapdoor activities or information gaps, maybe battleships or surveys. And students can start with a very simple sentence, je fais du jogging, or they can extend that sentence, je fais du jogging tous les jours, or they can turn it into a complex sentence by adding a reason, parce que c'est bon pour la santé. They can then work on a battleships task. This is a task where a student might choose 5 different squares where they will place their ships, and the other student has to guess where they've placed their ship. And they do that by using the visuals. So they might say, I dance every day. hoping that that is where the battleship is, and finding out whether or not they're right. Some students will refer to their vocabulary sheet, whilst others will do that from memory, or will use more complex language. Here we've got an example of building up a conversation or a role play. We've got the whole role play here with just the odd word replaced by a picture, and students can repeat this until they're comfortable with what they have to say. And then bit by bit, we can take away the support so that here they still have quite a lot of the vocabulary, but you can see in the first two sentences, the words have been taken away with just the first letter of every word left. And again, when the student feels comfortable enough, we can take all of the support away and they've just got the first letter of every word. Other pair activities can be used for information gap activities, such as parallel translations, where one student has the Spanish version and the other the English, and they each have to work out the missing words. But as support on the back of the card, they might be able to sneak a peek for help with some of the answers if they're stuck. You'll have to excuse me, I need to let the dog out. I'll be right back. I'm very sorry about that. He would have started barking and interrupted the talk had I not done that. Group work offers all the advantages of pair work in addition to presenting motivating opportunities for students to demonstrate their creativity, their independence, their spontaneity, but most importantly, their collaborative skills. And it's almost always fun and enjoyable. Here's an example in German where students are working in groups of 4 on a role play. Each student can take as long as they need to memorize the language. When they feel ready to move on, they can work through the different tasks, but all students work at their own pace. Here we have an example of a jigsaw activity aimed to improve reading skills. This is where we take a complex text and cut it up into sections, like this. So each student has a part of the text, and then working together in a group, they have to fit it into a whole so that it makes sense. They work collaboratively, supporting one another. And you may decide beforehand which section to give to which student. Or you might encourage students to engage in flipped learning, as in this example, where each student is given a tongue twister to learn at home. Again, you may decide which one to give to which student. They then work in groups the following lesson to teach their group their learnt tongue twister. There are a variety of computer-assisted language learning resources that you can use with your students to support language learning. Some are free, some need a joining fee, and I've added some of those here. If you click on the items, it'll take you to the links if you get the PowerPoint later. And of course, today we're focusing specifically on eLive as a learning platform. Here are my key takeaways from this presentation. Respond to the individual needs of your learners. Provide challenge and reinforcement for all your students. Think, core and branching activities. Provide formative assessment opportunities and give constructive feedback. Make time for subject pedagogy theory. Have a shared and agreed definition of differentiation with your team and be creative. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Tanya. Thanks for your presentation. Really enlightening and resourceful indeed. Okay, so Asplana, I'm going to ask you a few questions, okay, and then we will open the floor for some questions from the audience, if that's fine with you.
I'm just trying to work out how to remove the presentation. I'm not sure how to do that.
I'm so sorry I can't help you today because I'm joining you from my mobile phone, and that was most unexpected.
I think I'm going to have to leave it. I'm really sorry.
Barry, you can take the power, let's say, and do it yourself. Can you? Because I can't do that right now. Let me try and see if I can do that. Barry is the presenter now, so maybe he will. Yes, there it is.
Thank you.
He removed it. Okay, great. Thank you.
Right. So, Tanya, one of the quotes in your presentation came from the Department for Education. It was about adaptive teaching, which is, they came up with the idea that it's less likely to be valuable if the teacher artificially generates distinct tasks for different groups of students. So, if virtual exchanges or calls or telecollaboration experiences can be planned as a cooperative project in which learners have different roles and functions to be played during all that process. For instance, I don't know, like chair for mediation of debate, or a spokesperson or secretary that takes notes and in-class activities when you have your own students, or for example, when we have your students with synchronous online interactions with virtual exchange partners. Do you think that this kind of organization would enhance differentiation or adaptive teaching?
Adaptive teaching tends to happen in the moment. In other words, during the lesson, when the teacher notices that students are struggling to follow, and then adapts the teaching accordingly by maybe revisiting a point or rephrasing the questioning or moving faster to the next criteria. When planning for the learning, especially in a collaborative project, I believe that differentiation is more suitable. I also don't think there's anything wrong in producing additional support for those who need it. And I'm not a proponent necessarily of what the government is following in terms of ideology at the moment. But I think, for those who couldn't perform the task without it, I think it's important that there is that additional support. And at the end of the day, we want all of our students using the target language as much as possible. Some will do this from memory, but others will do it with prompting.
Okay, yeah, when they are interacting. Okay, right. Virtual exchanges, involve problem solving and decision making. Those are considered to be high order thinking skills that promote critical thinking and creativity. Okay. And also metacognition was, you mentioned metacognition. Yeah, if we understand it as the knowledge we have about our own cognition, okay, how aware we are of ourselves, the tasks we are to carry out, and the structures to be followed, okay, and how we manage all that. When we're doing a virtual exchange, and we engage in these tasks, how and when would it be the ideal moment or moments for a metacognitive reflection? And in a classroom, when would it be the same for in a virtual exchange? Would you recommend it to do it in the same moment, different moments? What are your thoughts on that?
Firstly, I think it's only the most stable or the most aware language learners that are able to use language learning strategies instinctively. For the majority of children, I think language learning strategies which allow them to memorize or access challenging reading texts or write more extensively and creatively, I think those need to be taught. So whether we do this at the start of a language learning course or whether we teach those strategies over time, and then students can be reminded of those strategies whenever they encounter a skill. Let me give you an example. Imagine that we want our students to listen to a monologue, and we want them to pick out how the speaker is feeling, and also to identify key vocabulary and situations. But there are words that they don't know. We might get them to share which strategies they already use to work out what those words mean. They might say that they've listened out for words that sound the same as their own language, or that they've guessed the words from the context. As a teacher, we might then model 2 strategies that the students haven't used, for example, prediction and verification. And then we might get them to listen to a text and guide them to try this out. Then maybe in 2 weeks' time, we want them to listen to another challenging text, and we remind them of the strategies that they've tried out previously. And then we might model another 2, such as using knowledge of sentence structure or grammar, or using words that we know surrounding the unknown word. In other words, when students are reflecting on the strategies they've used in order to be successful, then I think we can say that they're reflecting metacognitively. Oh, I can't hear you.
I was muted. I muted myself now. Okay, yeah, I'm using my mobile phone. Those are the things in virtual exchanges or these online conferences. Yeah, the point was that they can do that when they interact with their partners, or when they interact with the teachers. They can find those students can use those strategies. Okay, another question, right? So reports show that virtual exchanges provide teachers and students with opportunities for one-on-one interaction, whether synchronous or asynchronous. Yeah, in asynchronous interaction, we can use virtual learning environments like Google Classroom or Moodle-based that they can enhance this asynchronous interaction. Okay, and in online we can have the breakout rooms, and they have synchronous exchanges, interactions with their partners. In this interaction, when it's synchronous, okay, the contribution of mediators has proved to be useful and encourage participation, which is something that sometimes is very challenging for teachers to achieve. Yeah, for virtual exchange responsible people, to achieve. So in the presentation, the role of scaffolding, conceived as to decide when to offer and when to withdraw support, is highlighted. What are your thoughts on bringing older students or teacher assistants, okay, to carry out the role of mediators, okay, that could act as scaffolders, okay, and how could they help in differentiation or in adaptive teaching?
Yeah. I think we would then be interpreting the role of the older student or of the teaching assistant as the more knowledgeable other, according to Vygotsky. I think we'd need to be confident that they have the ability to guide the students effectively. But I think if given the tools to do so, I don't see why we shouldn't be using others in the breakout rooms to support scaffolding. In other words, we might make sure that they know the answers in advance, or make sure they're familiar with the language being used. My advice when I work with my student teachers in using teaching assistants is to have them there to enhance the learning by providing an opportunity for the students to practice their speaking beforehand, giving them the confidence they need before trying it out in a real situation with a conversation with someone they don't know as well.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting role for mediators before the synchronous interaction, or even for a synchronous interaction when it is written, when they can use forums. Okay, right. Yeah, the use of different languages. It's I don't know. I think it's a classic topic. Yeah, for foreign language teachers. Okay, how would you consider the use of different languages in class and in the exchange? In other words, from your point of view, is translanguaging or code switching, a helpful practice that may support adaptive teaching, an adaptive teaching approach? So, particularly in these learning experiences, in these virtual exchanges or courses.
Yes, allowing students maybe to speak in their home language and then listen to the other students speaking theirs. I think in this way, they're still using the receptive skills to improve their vocabulary, their grammar, but maybe they're not yet confident enough to produce the language, or you know, maybe they're producing the words that they know, but then interspersing those with words from their own language. I would say yes, I like that idea. I mean, I grew up bilingually, French and English, and with my sister and I just used to use whatever word would come up into our head first, and that just gave us the confidence to keep the language flowing. So definitely.
Okay, right. My last question, okay, from my notes, my last question, you know, since differentiation by attainment has been discouraged, okay, and as you put it, yeah, all students need, yeah, to be challenged. I do agree with that, okay. What are your recommendations? So, you know, that different types of differentiation take place in our virtual exchanges.
At times, I think all students will need to have language reinforced, or will need to move to the next stage. And I think in this case, it's a good idea to allow students to work at their own pace. Also to give them choices, maybe the choice of task or the choice of a different skill to practice, and the choice of what interests them. Also to be given additional support when needed, maybe given a glossary or given the answers to the more difficult questions. So maybe, you know, maybe there are 5 questions and there are a couple that are particularly tricky. So the teacher will give some of the students the answers to the tricky ones beforehand. And then at the end, it looks like everybody's answered all 5 questions. I think that really helps to build up their confidence.
Okay, yeah, and that can be a resource for our virtual exchanges. Okay, right. So now we're going to open the floor to the questions from the audience. Anybody? Does anybody want to participate? Any questions?
There is a question in the chat.
Okay, I can't read the chat. Sorry about that. Barry, can you read it for me, please? Sorry about that.
Well, maybe Anika would like to ask it, or if I can do it if she doesn't have a mic.
I can see Annika's question, so I'm happy to answer that.
Okay.
It's how do you make sure pair work is interesting for both students if their language level is very different, maybe because they both have a different background, as will often be the case with virtual exchange pair work. I think that's a really good question. I think maybe then this idea of you know, using your own language where you need to, and not putting the pressure on the student to always having to try in the target language, because they can hear it coming back at them. So either way, they will be able to improve, hopefully. But I take your point, also making sure that they've got the level of support needed to access that. So you might give them a prompt sheet with some suggested answers that they could select for themselves. Annika, I see you haven't got a microphone.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Annika for her question and your answer, Tanya. Anybody else?
So I've got
now
one
I can read.
I can see.
I think I can read now.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, I'll ask you then, Tanya. So this comes from Clara Alonso. Okay, how many class hours per day do you think would allow a teacher to be able to plan lessons in this way, offering choices, resorting to creativity, adapting tasks, and so on?
Do you know, that's the reason that is so interesting, Clara, is because this is why the UK government has said we must not artificially create tasks, because we are losing teachers every day from the profession because of the workload issue. And so the idea is that you don't do that. You don't create artificially the tasks. So maybe in the past, we would have expected 3 separate worksheets for a task. You know, you give the most challenging worksheet sheet to your most able, and then a middle ability one, and then one with lots of support on it, or really pared down for your low ability student. And that takes hours and hours to prepare. So this is much more about just adapting in the moment, checking which of your students is going to need that additional support. I agree with you that some of the activities I gave does require that adaptation, that planning in advance. But I think if you look at some of those activities, those are activities that can be planned for everyone, and then you allow the students just to work at their own pace.
Okay.
I can see that time constraints is a real problem.
I think, yeah, it's a real problem. Yeah, time constraints are always an issue. Okay, so there's another question here in the chat by Petra Cohen. Thank you very much for your question. Okay, if we have a more and a less knowledgeable student like Vygotsky, how do we make sure that the more knowledgeable student also works in his or her zone of proximal development?
Yeah, I like that question. Interestingly enough, I was just reading an article today about the use of flexible groupings and what happens in mixed attainment classes. So in the UK, we tend to set all of our classes, especially in the core subjects. So students of a similar ability are set in the same class. And this article was looking at what happens if you don't do that, if you have all students in the same class and you have mixed attainment. And then there were lots of comments from the children themselves saying why they liked being in a mixed attainment class. And a lot of them were saying, because we're helping one another, because we're learning from one another. But the danger would be that if you have the more knowledgeable pupil, then always giving the support, and the less able student always receiving the support. There have to be opportunities where it's co-learning, where it's much more collaborative than that. And as a teacher, you're going to need to think about the strengths of all of your individual students and how to tap into those strengths and really allow them to co-collaborate, co-learn, co-work together, so that it's not always that one child giving the support and that one child receiving the support. That great question really made me think, and it was good that I'd had that reading today.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, any other questions? Anybody? I think that, for example, for the last question, Tanya, when we have cooperative projects, it is the same thing, okay? When we have the knowledgeable student, those knowledgeable students, as long as, as they carry out different tasks, when they are engaged in those projects, okay, they can swap roles. So, and at the same time, we have them like carrying out not only because of the, but also carrying out some social functions that they are going to be needing later on. So that could be also strategy. Anybody else? Any other questions? Anybody else?
Yes, you were. Tanya, you were talking about students having different roles. I was just thinking that maybe, you could give, let's say, the more able student a role which is more challenging in the virtual exchange. For example, maybe introducing his class to the other class. Can you think of any other ways, any other roles that you could use in virtual exchange?
I need to research virtual exchanges a lot more, Barry, I think. I don't know, because having not engaged in it myself, I'm struggling to think of that. But that's my next task, is to find out a lot more about the virtual exchanges and then add to that repertoire.
Can I just say something about that? Because when we tried, for example, when we have we've had some asynchronous sessions in which these students, they have to post something, I don't know, for example, if they have created videos or for example, if they have been interacting with your students and they had, I don't know, to post on Padlets, when I had them gripped, okay, the person who was the note taker and after all was kind of putting together all what their group of students was doing, it was the person, you know, with more abilities in English. So more or less was the mediator, but at the same time was the person who was posting, was just making sure that, you know, all the language produced by the other people in the groups made sense of the content and also of the language. So this is one of the roles for those students that we had in the virtual exchanges, and it worked because, you know, they felt important, you know, and the other students, those ones with less linguistic abilities or knowledge, okay, they managed to have all their thoughts and contributions posted on Padlet. So I was, for example, one of the strategies that worked for us. Oh, okay. Another question in the chat by Doha Lasis Sonyi. I hope I pronounced it properly. Okay. How would you plan to remove support and differentiation over time? For example, mid and longer term?
I mean, the reason you would want to remove support and differentiation, I guess, is because they're coming up to an exam and all of the students have to be able to attempt the same type of exam. Other than that, in the real world, I don't think we ever have to remove that support and that differentiation because people will adapt. I mean, for example, if you're in a conversation and you realize that the person you're speaking to isn't understanding as well, you then paraphrase or you use actions or you point to things. You find alternative ways of supporting them to understand what you're saying. I think if you're then wanting to develop that mastery because you're doing an exam with them, you then just keep practicing and then remove it bit by bit. So you might, for example, if they're doing a listening task, you might be giving a transcript to help to read as well as to listen to that task at the same time. And then maybe bit by bit, you would start to reduce the transcript. Initially, it might be the whole thing, and then you'll just give them parts of it. And bit by bit, you would start to remove that support from them. So yes, you could do that, but I would say only really if you're preparing them for an exam.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, okay, anybody else? Any other questions, guys?
Hello, this is Begoña. It's not a question actually, but it's just a comment on the question that you asked, that actually Barry asked Tanya before. And I was thinking about the situation where students are carrying out a linguistic tandem, where one of them is a native speaker on one occasion, and then he becomes the L2 learner on the other occasion. Like, for example, when they are learning Spanish and English and they are practicing both languages in a tandem situation, then that has been our experience, that those students who are the native speakers and they become the experts, that is very fruitful for them as well, because they develop these kind of strategies where they have to speak slower, to speak in a clearer way, to make themselves understood, to rephrase what they are saying in their own language. But then that helps them also when they are practicing the L2 later on a different day or in the second part of the task, for instance. And we have seen students that were shy, that didn't dare to talk in the L2, but then when they became the experts, when they were the native speakers, they really helped the other students. And that was fruitful for them when they became the L2 learner again. So I think that's also a way to differentiate. It's a natural way to differentiate, because they do it naturally. Just, an idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Begoña. Okay, we do have another question. Yeah, right, by Charlotte de Frias. Right, do you have any specific strategies for spotting a student having difficulties with the lesson, Tanya?
Well, when you're working with the whole class, it's important to be questioning each and every student in that class so that you know how much they know. So that's the first thing, and obviously know each and every one of their names. One of the ways of getting feedback very quickly and looking at all of your students is to use mini whiteboards. So you might say, for example, it's a translation task and you want them to give you the translation of the word. They all write it on their mini whiteboard. They hold it up. You can see at a glance who's got it and who hasn't. That's another way of spotting difficulties. Obviously, when they're working independently or working in pairs, you'll be constantly walking around the classroom, circulating, looking in on them, listening to them, checking to see what they're doing. Has anybody got any problems with that? You're looking at the work, you're listening to what their answers are, so you'll be able to pick up on all of those difficulties.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's what Barry said. Yeah, yeah, really good one. Okay, right. Anybody else? Any questions? Hold on, Christy's writing. Anybody else? Any other questions?
I just wanted to say something, but at the end, if Christy's going to say something, I'll wait a minute, about where to find the recordings and stuff. Okay, so. Well, it looks as if she isn't. So,
Okay.
I'd like to thank Tanya and Abraham from the bottom of my heart for being part of this today, and it was a very interesting talk and some very interesting questions too. And also thank you very much to those members of the audience. Okay, I like to call you participants. Okay, for your participation. Okay, I just wanted to say that I left. This is the I'm going to put the address of our project page. There it is. So if you could copy that, that is where you will find the recordings of the workshops that we did in November and December, and also where you will find the recording of this webinar, the recording and the PowerPoint, which Tanya has kindly agreed to give to us. So you'll find all of that here, okay? And there was something I posted before, which is the next webinar, okay? Maybe Christy would like to say something about this. Okay, this is by our dear friend and colleague, Kurt Kohn. I don't know if Christy wants to say something.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank you, Tanya and Abraham. Really, a very inspiring talk. And I think that differentiation is really something that is important to all of us, to teachers, to teacher trainers, to student teachers. Yeah, because we have all those different backgrounds in our classroom, all those different talents. Now, how to go about it, and to create the most enriching experience for them. It is really nice, but at the same time, very challenging. So I think it was really a very inspiring talk. So thank you so much for that. And we will be having, indeed, as Barbie was just explaining to you, we will have the next webinar on the 22nd of March in a month's time. And then we will have Kurt Kohn. Kurt has been working with us in previous projects in TILA, in TECOLA, and he has a lot of experience, research experience, and teacher training experience on the matter. And he will be focusing on the lingua franca approach to virtual exchanges, because many of the teachers have an ideal in mind, and that's the ideal of the native speaker. But who is a native speaker? So he will be challenging us and focusing on empowering the learner by using lingua franca in virtual exchanges. So hope to see you there. And thank you again, Barry and Vygo, also for organizing this this very nice webinar. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yes.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Begonia. Thanks. Yeah, Christy. And thank you so much to Tanya. Really, really aligning, as I said before. Yeah. We do have issues with inclusion here. I mean, issues because we do have a law in Valencia about inclusion and differentiation. It is a challenge for every single teacher. Okay. Primary education, secondary education, yeah, particularly, yeah, and vocational training as well these days. So thank you so much. Really, really resourceful. I think it was very practical. So thank you, Tanya. Thank you for being there. And thank you to the organizers, the managers of the eLife project.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Well, I hope to see you around. Thank you, Barry, Begonia, Christy. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you to our wonderful audience too. And
Exactly.
see you in March.
I'll see them in class tomorrow.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Okay.
Right. Bye-bye.
Ta-ta.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Ta-ta.
Bye-bye.